He fed an alien cub out of mercy the next hour. Its fierce tigress mother demanded to see him. The wind howled across the barren mining planet called Delta 9, carrying dust and echoes of long-forgotten battles. In the middle of that endless wasteland stood a small human outpost, half buried under rust and time, and inside one of its cracked metal domes lived a man named Eli, a quiet mechanic who fixed things that no one else cared about. He had been there for years, far from Earth, far from anyone who even remembered his name. Eli's days were all the same: oil, wires, silence, and the sound of machines that never spoke back. But that night, something strange broke the pattern. A faint noise came from outside his workshop, soft but sharp enough to make him stop mid-turn of his wrench. It sounded like a whimper, small and frightened. Like a child lost in the dark. He frowned, setting his tools down. No one should be outside this late. The air was cold enough to freeze breath into mist. Yet the sound came again, a weak cry hidden behind the wind. Eli grabbed his lamp and stepped out into the shadows. His boots crunching against dry metal dust, he scanned the empty yard, the faint light of his lamp cutting through the darkness. And there, between two old crates, something moved. At first, he thought it was a small animal until it lifted its head, and he saw eyes glowing faint gold in the dark. It was a cub, an alien cub, its striped fur dirty and matted, its thin body trembling with hunger. Its breathing was shallow, and its eyes darted between fear and hope. Eli froze. He had seen creatures like this before, usually dead or caged by the local scavengers. Feeding one was dangerous. It could attract predators, or worse, its mother. But something about those eyes stopped him from walking away. They weren't wild. They weren't cruel. They were desperate. He looked around, making sure no patrol drone was watching, then crouched slowly. "Hey there, little one," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the wind. The cub tilted its head, unsure, but didn't run. Its ribs were visible, and its tail dragged weakly in the dust. Eli sighed, opening the ration pack he had in his pocket. He tore a piece of the synthetic bread and placed it on the ground. The cub sniffed the air, then crawled closer. Step by step, it ate greedily, small growls of hunger escaping its throat as if afraid the food might vanish. Eli couldn't help but smile, watching it eat. He didn't realize how long it had been since he had seen another living being up close. As the cub finished the food, it looked up at him again, its mouth stained with crumbs. For a brief moment, something passed between them, something wordless, a spark of trust, or maybe just gratitude. Eli didn't know which. "And it didn't matter," he whispered. "Go on, before someone sees you." But the cub didn't move. It only blinked slowly, as if trying to understand him. Then it let out a small chirp, a strange sound between a purr and a sigh, and ran into the shadows. Disappearing into the dunes beyond the fence, Eli stood there for a long time, his lamp flickering in the wind. He told himself it was nothing, just an animal that got lucky. But deep down, he knew he had crossed an invisible line. On Delta 9, mercy was rare, and kindness had a price. Inside the workshop, he sat back at his desk. The storm outside grew stronger, shaking the walls like distant thunder. He tried to return to work, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Something about the way that little creature looked at him kept replaying in his mind. Those eyes, so full of life, despite hunger and fear. He poured himself a drink, staring at the flickering lamp. Maybe he was lonely enough to imagine things. Maybe the isolation had finally caught up with him. Still, he smiled to himself, whispering, "Poor thing. Hope you find your way home." Then, through the howl of the wind, he thought he heard something faint, not words. Not exactly, but a distant rumble that didn't belong to the storm. Eli walked to the window, wiping away the dust. Far out in the darkness, something glowed faintly. Two golden eyes, larger this time, flashing once, before vanishing into the night. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't know what it was. But he felt the air grow heavier. Something was coming. He shut the window and turned off the lamp. His heart beating faster. Maybe it was just his imagination. Or maybe the cub hadn't been alone. He didn't sleep that night. Every sound outside made him grip the wrench near his bed tighter. The memory of that small, trembling body haunted him. And for the first time in years, Eli wished he wasn't alone. If you're enjoying this story so far, and want to see what happens next on HFYC-Fi, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes, even a single act of kindness can wake the monsters sleeping in the dark. The next morning came quietly. The twin suns of Delta 9 rose slowly over the red horizon, painting the metal wasteland in dull gold. Eli barely slept that night. His mind replaying the glowing eyes he had seen through the window, he told himself it was just the storm, that the shifting sand reflected the light, but deep down, he knew better. He stepped outside with a mug of bitter coffee, the wind dry and cold against his face. The yard looked normal, no footprints, no marks. Nothing to show a creature had been there. Still, something felt off. The silence was heavier. Like the world was holding its breath. He shook off the thought and went back to his work. Engines needed tuning. Generators needed fixing. And customers, few as they were, didn't like excuses. But his hands moved slower that day, his ears listening for sounds that weren't there. Every creak of metal made him glance over his shoulder. Hours passed. The storm clouds gathered again in the distance, thick and rolling as he worked. A shadow moved across the yard, large and graceful. At first, Eli thought it was just one of the big loader machines, until it moved again. Far too smooth for metal. His heart skipped a beat. He reached for his blaster, half covered in dust, beside the door. The shadow stopped. A deep, low growl rumbled through the air like thunder trapped in a throat. Eli froze, eyes scanning the horizon, and then he saw it. A massive shape emerged from the storm, haze tall, muscular, and striped with orange and black under the sunlight. A tigress, but not from Earth. Her skin was faintly metallic in places. Her claws curved like polished blades. Her tail swayed behind her with terrifying control, and her glowing eyes locked directly on him. She was beautiful, in a way that frightened him. Powerful, graceful, but untamed, her face bore strange markings, tribal patterns burned into her fur, symbols of a warrior species. And next to her, trotting proudly, was the same little cub from the night before. The cub chirped, its bright eyes searching for the human who had fed it. Eli's pulse pounded in his ears. He whispered to himself, "Oh no, what have I done?" The mother let out a sharp roar that echoed across the valley. The air trembled with her anger. Eli took a step back, holding up his hands. "I didn't mean any harm," he said quietly, though he knew she couldn't understand human words. The cub ran ahead, wagging its small tail, rubbing against Eli's leg like a house cat greeting an old friend. The giant tigress stopped mid-growl, her head tilting slightly, confusion flickering in her burning eyes. She took another step closer, her claws digging into the sand. The ground shook under her weight. Eli didn't move. He had learned long ago never run from a predator. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. Her growl softened, but her muscles stayed tense. The cub made a small purring noise, wrapping its tiny arms around Eli's boot, as if protecting him. The mother's eyes widened for a moment. Then she looked at the cub. Then at the human, her head tilted again, like she was trying to make sense of something that shouldn't exist. A human showing mercy. A human feeding her child. Eli slowly crouched. Keeping his hands visible, he didn't dare reach out. But his voice softened. "It's all right. I'm not your enemy." The tigress growled again. Lower this time, but not in anger, more like a warning. Or a test. Eli stayed still. Heart hammering. Minutes felt like hours. Then, from behind her, the wind carried a distant sound, metal screeching. Voices shouting, patrol drones. They were heading this way. If they saw her, they would open fire without question. Eli glanced toward the sound and back at the tigress. "Go," he whispered urgently, waving his hand toward the dunes. But the tigress didn't move. Instead, she let out a deep growl and stepped closer, her face now just a few feet away. Eli could see her eyes clearly, now golden with a strange intelligence. She studied him as if trying to read his soul, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Only the cub's soft purring filled the silence. Then, with a swift motion, she grabbed the cub gently by the scruff of its neck and turned away. Her tail brushed the ground, her muscles rippling like coiled steel. Before vanishing into the mist, she looked back once more. Their eyes met again, and Eli felt something stir inside him. It wasn't fear anymore. It was curiosity, and maybe something deeper. Something that whispered, "This isn't the end." The drones passed overhead minutes later. Scanning the area, Eli stayed inside, pretending to be busy, but his mind wasn't on the work. He replayed every second of that encounter. The way she looked at him, the way she hesitated before leaving. It didn't feel like an animal's reaction. It felt intelligent, deliberate. When night came, Eli couldn't focus on anything. He stood near the window again, staring at the horizon. The storm was thick now, lightning flashing like veins in the sky. Every sound made him tense. Every shadow looked alive. He told himself she wouldn't come back, that she had taken her cub and gone. But deep down, a part of him hoped she would. And then, as the wind howled across the yard, he heard it again, the same soft whimper, faint but familiar. He grabbed his lamp and stepped outside. The storm hit his face like needles, the air heavy with dust and heat. He turned toward the sound and froze. There, on the ground near the crates, was something wrapped in torn fabric. He knelt down and found another cub, smaller than the first, trembling and cold. Eli's stomach dropped. She had brought it here, but why? He looked around, searching the dark horizon. Lightning flashed, and for a split second, he saw her silhouette again, massive, waiting, watching from afar. Her golden eyes glowed once, then vanished, leaving him alone with the new cub. The storm screamed louder, and the realization hit him. This wasn't just a meeting. It was a message. Eli picked up the tiny creature, cradling it in his arms. The cub's heartbeat fluttered weakly against his hand. He whispered to himself, "What are you doing to me?" Big one. Somewhere in the storm, a deep roar answered him, low and distant. It wasn't anger this time. It sounded like approval, or a warning of what was still to come. The storm lasted through the night, turning the sky into a roaring ocean of dust and fire. Inside the small metal shelter, Eli sat beside the weak heater, holding the second cub close to his chest. Its fur was damp and cold, its breathing slow but steady. He had wrapped it in an old jacket, whispering quietly, as if his voice alone could keep it alive. He had no idea why the tigress had brought another cub. Maybe it was a test, maybe a warning, or maybe she trusted him in some strange alien way. He didn't understand it, and yet he couldn't turn the tiny thing away. Kindness was a habit he could never kill, even on a planet that punished it. Lightning flashed outside, rattling the steel walls. Eli looked toward the window, half expecting to see those glowing eyes again. But the night gave nothing back except wind and silence. The little cub stirred, making a weak chirp. He smiled softly, brushing its fur with a shaky hand. "Don't worry, little one," he whispered. "I'll keep you safe." Morning came like a pale ghost, the suns hidden behind thick clouds. The storm had left the outpost, scarred, half the antennas torn. The fences bent flat. Eli stepped outside. Blinking through the dust, the air smelled of metal and ozone. Then he froze. Massive footprints marked the sand, circling his workshop, each print deep enough to hold a human skull. She had been there, walking around him while he slept, watching, maybe guarding, maybe deciding. Eli's chest tightened. He looked toward the horizon, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. Something in the air had changed. The storm was gone. But the real danger had only begun. He spent the morning repairing his roof and checking the generator. All the while, the thought circled in his mind. She was near, waiting for something. When the suns began to sink, painting the sky blood red, the silence deepened. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. Eli sat beside the heater again. Both cubs curled near him now, one sleeping, one watching him with bright curiosity. He felt a strange peace watching them. Maybe loneliness had finally broken him, or maybe this was what it felt like to matter again. He didn't have time to think. A low rumble shook the ground. At first he thought it was thunder returning. Then came another, closer, deeper. The air vibrated, and the lamp flickered. The cubs raised their heads, ears twitching. Eli's breath caught. He knew that sound. The mother was back. The main door of the workshop groaned under a heavy weight. Something massive moved outside, brushing against the metal walls. Eli grabbed his blaster, but didn't point it. He stepped forward slowly. Every instinct screamed to hide. But another voice whispered, if she wanted him dead, he would already be dead. The door shuddered once, twice, then bent inward with a loud crash. Cold air rushed in, carrying sand and the scent of wild heat, and there she was. The alien tigress filled the doorway like a living storm, her stripes glowing faintly under the flickering light. Her golden eyes burned, locked on him, her claws dragged against the floor, carving thin lines of metal. Eli's mouth went dry. The cub squealed and ran to her, pressing against her legs. The sight made her pause, her muscles tensing but not striking. The blaster felt useless in his hands. Slowly, he lowered it to the floor. "I took care of them," he said quietly, voice trembling. "I didn't hurt them." The tigress tilted her head, her breath deep and steady, each exhale like a furnace. She sniffed the air around him. Moving closer, her eyes darted to the cubs, then back to him. Something in her expression changed, still dangerous, but not purely rage anymore. Eli stood still, afraid to breathe too loudly. The tigress leaned closer until her face was inches from his. He could see the faint scars around her eyes, could feel the heat of her breath. Her pupils narrowed to slits, then widened again. For a moment, he thought she might attack. Instead, she made a sound, a low, throaty growl that wasn't quite anger, not quite peace. It sounded like a question. Eli slowly knelt and pushed the jacket with the smaller cub toward her. She watched him closely, every muscle still tight. When the cub crawled into her arms, she let out a soft, vibrating sound, almost like a purr. Eli swallowed hard, whispering, "You're welcome." Then, the sound of engines shattered the fragile moment. Eli's radio crackled, alive voices shouting, metallic whirring in the distance. Outpost patrols? They were scanning the area for hostile biosignatures. If they found her, they'd fire missiles first and ask questions later. The tigress lifted her head, ears twitching. Eli's heart raced. He waved his hands, whispering fast, "You need to go. They'll kill you." She stared at him. Unmoving, the cubs pressed closer to her legs. Whining softly, she looked torn between fight and flight. The radio voice grew clearer. "Sector 7 heat spike detected." "Deploying drones," Eli cursed under his breath. He turned to the Tigress, pointing toward the back door that led to the canyon behind the ridge. "Go now," he said. Still, she didn't move. Her eyes locked on his again, glowing brighter under the alarm light. Then, with a sudden motion, she pushed the smaller cub toward him hard, enough to make him stumble. The gesture was unmistakable. She was leaving it with him, trusting him. Before Eli could react, she roared a sound so powerful it shook the whole building. The drones approaching outside swerved, their sensors blinding out for a second. And in that second, she leapt through the smoke and sand. Vanishing into the storm, Eli ran to the door, calling out, but she was gone. Only her roar echoed across the wasteland, like thunder fading into the horizon. The patrol drones arrived moments later. Scanning everything, they questioned him, searched the area, but found nothing except broken fences and dust. Eli lied through his teeth, saying the storm wrecked his sensors. When they left, he locked the door, chest pounding. He sank to the floor beside the heater, both cubs trembling beside him. He stared at the broken doorway where she had stood. The image burned in his mind, those golden eyes, that roar that wasn't just wild but full of meaning. He didn't know what she wanted. He didn't know if she would return. But one thing was clear. He was part of something now. Something alive and dangerous. Outside, the wind howled again. But under it came a faint sound, a roar, distant but familiar. Eli smiled faintly, whispering, "You'll come back, won't you?" The cub in his lap purred softly, as if answering. And somewhere in the dark canyons beyond the ridge, two golden eyes blinked, once watching, waiting, remembering. 3 days passed since the storm and the standoff. Eli hadn't slept properly once. Every sound outside still made him flinch. Every flicker of light made him think she had returned. But each morning, he opened his door to nothing except red dust and silence. The cubs were still with him. The smaller one clung to his arm wherever he went. The older one had learned how to sneak tools from his bench, trying to copy him, tiny claws tapping against the metal. He found himself laughing sometimes, quietly. The sound strange after so many lonely years. But under that laugh was the same question. Why had she left them? And when would she come back? At night, he looked out across the dunes. Sometimes he swore he saw something moving just beyond the horizon, a ripple in the dark, a shimmer of gold. Maybe she was watching from the canyons, maybe protecting them from afar. Or maybe he was just seeing ghosts made from dust and hope. The patrols had increased since that night. Large drones floated through the skies, scanning for unauthorized life forms. Eli kept his signal dampeners running day and night. If they detected the cubs, both he and they would be erased without question. He couldn't let that happen, not after what he'd seen in her eyes. He began to modify his workshop into something safer. He dug a hollow under the floor, built a small den with old insulation panels. He taught the cubs to stay silent when the alarm sounded. They listened, somehow understanding, each time he climbed down there. They would press their small heads against his chest. He'd whisper, "It's okay, stay quiet, little ones." And in those moments, the silence felt sacred. One evening, while fixing a broken generator outside, Eli felt it, the same shift in the air as before. The wind grew still, the sand hushed. Every instinct told him he was being watched. He turned slowly, and there she was. The Tigress stood on the ridge above the yard, half hidden by shadows. her stripes glowing faintly under the twin moons. His breath caught. She looked different this time. Not angry, not wild, just cautious. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, quietly, Eli set down his wrench and raised his hands, palms open. "It's all right," he whispered. The cubs inside the shelter heard his voice and chirped, running out before he could stop them. They bounded through the sand straight toward her, squealing happily. The mother lowered herself slightly as they reached her, nuzzling them one by one. A sight made Eli's throat tighten. He took one careful step forward. She didn't move away. Another step. Now he was close enough to see her eyes again, deep, golden pools reflecting the moons. The air between them buzzed with something neither of them could explain. He wanted to speak, but words felt too small. So he simply reached out a hand, slowly, open. The tigress growled low, but didn't strike. Instead, she leaned forward, her nose brushing his palm for a single heartbeat. The touch burned like electricity's soft fur, heat, and a strange pulse under her skin. Then she pulled back, her gaze steady, questioning. Eli whispered, "You trust me now?" She blinked once, slow, deliberate, and then turned her head toward the canyons. As if telling him to follow, he hesitated. It could be a trap, or it could be an invitation. Still, something inside him said go. He followed her through the dunes under the pale moons. The cubs trotted beside them, tails waving like little flags of peace. They reached a canyon half an hour later. The walls glowed faintly with mineral veins that shimmered under the moonlight. The tigress stopped near a pool of clear water and looked back at him. Eli realized then this was her home, or what was left of it. There were marks on the rocks, claw patterns, and faint metallic bones half buried in sand. An old battle site, maybe her tribe's graveyard. She growled softly and sat beside the pool, the cubs running around her legs. Eli knelt nearby, silent. He felt like he was standing on sacred ground when the wind passed through the canyon. It carried faint echoes low, almost musical. The tigress lifted her head and made a deep humming sound, answering the wind, a ritual, a memory, maybe a prayer. Eli watched in awe, understanding nothing yet feeling everything. After a while, she turned her gaze back to him. Her eyes weren't just gold now. They shimmered with faint light. Then she did something that made his heart stop. She reached toward him, not with claws, but with her paw turned upward, open. It was a gesture he'd seen among humans countless times. A gesture of peace. Slowly, Eli mirrored it, pressing his palm against her paw. Her claws were cold, but her skin beneath was warm. Alive, they stayed like that, two creatures from different worlds, breathing the same quiet air. Then, from far above, a light cut across the canyon wall. A drone beam. Eli's heart jumped. The tigress snapped her head upward, eyes narrowing. He whispered fast, "Hide them." She growled low and pushed the cubs into a crack in the rock. The drone's light swept closer, humming louder. Eli ran to his pack and pulled out a signal disruptor, smashing it against the ground to activate the burst. The canyon flashed white as the pulse spread. The drone stuttered mid-air, sparks bursting from its sensors. It spiraled and crashed behind the ridge with a distant boom. The cubs cried, the tigress roared. Eli gasped, clutching his chest from the energy shock. When the echoes died, the canyon was silent again. Smoke rose in the distance, and the faint whine of other drones began far away. They would come looking. He turned to her, breathing hard. "We have to go," he said. She looked at him, then at the cubs, then back toward the outpost. For the first time, she gave a short nod, clear and certain. They moved quickly through the shadows. Eli carried one cub, the other clung to his shoulder. The tigress walked beside him, her massive form silent and graceful. The world felt smaller now, darker. They reached the edge of his yard before dawn. Eli ushered them inside, sealing the door, the metal trembling under the rising wind. Inside, the cubs curled up beside the heater. The tigress sat near the doorway, her tail twitching softly, eyes still alert. Eli sat across from her, exhausted. They didn't need words. The silence between them said enough. He looked at her and smiled faintly. "Guess we're in this together now," he whispered. The tigress blinked once, slow, outside. The first light of dawn broke over the wasteland, painting gold on metal and fur alike. And for the first time since coming to Delta 9, Eli didn't feel alone anymore, but far beyond the dunes. The outpost commander stared at the damaged drone feed replaying on his screen. The thermal images showed something large beside a human heat signature. Too large, too fast to be a native creature. He leaned forward, frowning. "Send the hunting units," he ordered. Sector 7 is no longer empty. Inside the workshop, Eli didn't hear the order. He sat quietly as the tigress finally closed her eyes to rest. He felt the ground's faint hum through the floor, like a warning heartbeat under the planet's skin. Something was coming, and whatever it was, it would test the fragile bond they had just begun to build. The sun sank early that evening. Swallowed by a horizon thick with storm smoke, Eli stood outside his shelter, feeling the weight of the air pressing down like a warning. Even the cubs were restless, pacing and chuffing in nervous bursts. The tigress sat at the edge of the yard, her golden eyes fixed on the distant ridge where the drones had vanished 2 nights ago. Something was moving out there, and she could sense it long before he could hear it. Eli had sealed the doors, powered down every light, and armed the outer motion traps, but his hands shook as he checked the old rifle he kept hidden behind his bench. It had been years since he'd used it, and he prayed he wouldn't have to. The silence outside was too perfect. No wind, no static. Only the slow crackle of the heater inside. Even the stars seemed dimmer, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Then the alarm flickered one red pulse on the monitor. Movement detected. Eli turned down the volume and leaned closer. Heat signatures, multiple, approaching fast. At first he thought they were drones, but the pattern was wrong. Too erratic, too alive, and then he saw them. Tiny specks of light crawling over the ridge like fire ants. Raiders, he cursed under his breath, not military, not patrol. Worse scavengers, humans without loyalty. They came to steal scrap, fuel, slaves, anything that breathed or moved, and they had found his outpost. The tigress rose slowly, her tail low, her body tense and silent. She looked at him once, and he understood without words. She had fought these kinds before, and she was ready to fight again. Eli swallowed hard. "There are too many," he whispered. She blinked, slow and calm, as if to say, "Then let them come." The first explosions hit minutes later, small charges at the gate. Sharp pops echoing through the dust. Eli grabbed the cubs, pushing them into the crawl space under the floor. "Stay quiet, stay still," he said. His voice shaking, the smaller one whimpered. The older one growled softly. He forced himself to smile. "It's okay. Your mother's here." And then the world broke open. The gate burst inward, a wave of fire and sand. 5 raiders rushed in, armored in scavenged metal plates, shouting to each other through cracked helmets. Eli ducked behind the workbench as bullets tore through the wall. Sparks showered from the broken lights, plunging the room into a strobe of red and shadow. He fired once, hitting one in the shoulder. The man screamed, dropping his weapon. The others turned their guns toward him. And then came the roar, not from any machine, but from something primal and ancient. The sound shook the ground and split the air. The tigress exploded through the smoke, a streak of gold and fury. She hit the first raider so hard his armor crumpled like paper. The others opened fire, but she was already moving. Her claws flashed, her tail whipped, and two more went down screaming. Blood and dust filled the air. Eli could barely see her. Only flashes of glowing stripes and eyes like suns behind storm clouds. He crawled toward the door, trying to seal it, but another explosion tore the wall apart. More raiders poured in, yelling, firing blindly. The Tigress leapt onto the roof, ripping one of them up through the hole with terrifying speed. Eli ducked as the body fell beside him. He had never seen power like that. It was beauty and death combined, moving with purpose. Not a monster, something more. Something majestic, then, amid the chaos. He heard a cry, one of the cubs. The older one had crawled out, frightened by the noise. A raider spotted it. Raising his rifle, Eli didn't think. He ran. He slammed into the man before the trigger could pull. Both crashing into the wall, the gun fired into the ceiling. Spraying sparks, the Tigress turned instantly. Seeing her cub cornered, her eyes flared with light. She roared so loud the sound cracked the metal walls. The man froze in terror, a second too long. And she was on him. Eli turned away as she ended it. Silence fell except for fire crackling and the soft whine of dying machines. The last raider stumbled backward, bleeding. He dropped his weapon and ran for the gate, but the Tigress didn't chase him. Instead, she turned toward Eli, chest heaving. Fur streaked with smoke and blood. Her eyes searched him. Checking if he was hurt, he shook his head, gasping, "I'm fine." "It's over." She looked around the burning yard, then back to him. The cubs crawled out. Squeaking softly, the big Tigress lowered herself. Letting them climb onto her back, the sight broke him. This was no mindless beast. She was a mother. A warrior, and something else entirely. Outside, the night sky burned orange with flames from wrecked vehicles. The scent of fuel and blood filled the air. Eli walked to the gate, staring at the horizon. The ridge glowed faintly, more lights. Dozens this time. The raiders weren't finished. They were regrouping, preparing to strike again before dawn. He turned back to her, panic rising. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll be back with more." The Tigress looked toward the cubs. Then to him, then back to the ridge. Her claws flexed. But her tail twitched uncertainly. He could see the conflict in her, the instinct to fight versus the need to protect. Eli made his choice for both of them. He ran inside, grabbing packs, tools, and rations, stuffing everything into a crate. When he came out, she was still standing there. Watching the ridge, he pointed toward the east, toward the old canyon tunnels. "We go there, we hide," he said firmly. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she stepped forward, her massive paw thudding against the metal floor. She bent her head slightly, a gesture that almost looked like agreement. They left the burning outpost behind as the first light of dawn crept over the dunes. Eli didn't look back. The smoke rose like a black tower behind them. The cubs huddled close on their mother's back, and beside her walked a tired human. Covered in ash but still alive, the Tigress glanced at him once, their eyes meeting through the morning haze. In that silent look, something unspoken passed between them. Not fear, not gratitude, something deeper. An understanding that neither of them could explain. Behind them, the raiders reached the outpost again. But this time, the wreckage was empty, only claw marks on steel, and a single message burned into the sand by plasma heat. A symbol drawn by claw and hand together, half human, half alien, a warning, and a promise. Far ahead, in the rising light, Eli stumbled on the rough path through the dunes. The Tigress slowed her pace so he could keep up. She was wounded, limping slightly. But still strong, he looked at her and said softly, "You saved me again." She made a low rumble, half growl, half hum. The cubs purred, and the sound blended with the wind. For the first time, the wasteland didn't sound empty anymore. As the suns rose higher, firelight faded behind them. But Eli knew that night was only the beginning. The hunters would come, the soldiers would follow. And whatever this fragile bond between man and beast had become, it was about to be tested by something far greater than either of them had ever faced. They reached the canyon by midday, the suns blazing high above the red stone walls. Eli could barely stand, his legs shaking, lungs burning from the long run. The tigress walked beside him, her stride slower now. A faint limp in her right leg, blood matted her fur where shrapnel had cut deep. But she didn't complain. She never made a sound of pain. The cubs trotted beside her, tired but alive. Small streaks of gold against the sand. They found shelter inside an old mining tunnel, half buried under collapsed rock. Eli cleared the entrance and helped the tigress lie down, his hands trembling as he saw how badly she was hurt. Her flank had a long gash, still bleeding, her breathing heavy and uneven. He tore a strip from his shirt, dipped it in water, and pressed it gently against the wound. She growled low, eyes flashing, but didn't strike. "It's all right," he whispered. "Just hold still." The cubs whimpered and pressed against her side. Trying to comfort her, Eli worked in silence, cleaning the wound with what little medical gel he had left. Each time he touched her, she flinched but stayed still. When he finished wrapping the bandage, he sat back, exhausted. "You saved all of us," he said softly. "Let me save you too." The tigress watched him, her eyes heavy but alert. Then she lowered her head, resting it against the stone floor. For the first time, she looked vulnerable, not as a predator, but as something alive and tired and hurting. Eli stared at her for a long time. His chest tightening, he whispered, "You're not just a beast. Are you?" Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint mechanical hums from the distance. Drones again, scanning the wasteland. Eli shut off his signal beacon and pulled a tarp across the entrance. Leaving only a thin slit of light, they sat together in the dim glow of the heater. The cubs fell asleep, breathing softly. The tigress's chest rose and fell, each breath slow and deep. Eli leaned against the wall, exhaustion washing over him like a tide. Sleep took him before he could fight it. He woke hours later to a strange sound. A low vibration filled the air, deep and rhythmic, almost musical. He looked around and saw the tigress sitting upright, eyes glowing faintly. She was humming a tone that pulsed through the air like a heartbeat. The cubs joined in, their smaller voices weaving around hers. Eli watched, spellbound, realizing it wasn't just noise. It was communication, a language of sound and rhythm. And somehow, his body responded, feeling the vibrations more than hearing them. When she stopped, the silence felt heavy. Then she turned toward him, tilting her head. Eli hesitated, then placed a hand over his heart and spoke softly. "My name's Eli." He pointed to himself again. "Eli," she blinked once, studying him. Then she made a low, short sound, something between a growl and a word. "Eli," she repeated, rough but clear. His eyes widened. She had said his name. He smiled. Trying to hide the shock, he pointed at her, uncertain how to ask her name. She blinked slowly, her gaze lowering to the cubs. Then she tapped the ground twice with her paw. A deep sound echoed through the cave, vibrating in the stone. It wasn't a word in any language he knew, but he felt it. Karith. That's what it sounded like. He whispered it back. Karith. The tigress's eyes softened, a faint shimmer of light crossing her pupils. The cubs chirped. echoing the sound like a song. In that moment, the canyon didn't feel like a wasteland anymore. It felt alive, ancient, and listening. Hours passed quietly. Eli used his tools to build a signal jammer and a small fire heater. Karith watched him the whole time, her gaze following every motion. She seemed fascinated by the sparks, by the way he shaped metal. Once, when he dropped a wrench, she picked it up delicately with her paw and handed it back to him. He laughed, shaking his head. "Guess you're learning faster than me." That night, the winds returned, howling through the canyons like ghosts. Eli sat by the heater, staring at the glowing coals. Karith rested near the cubs, her breathing calm. He whispered more to himself than to her. "I used to think I came here to fix machines." He looked at her. "But maybe I came here to remember what being human means." The tigress lifted her head slightly. Eyes half open, she didn't understand the words, but the tone made her tail flick softly. She made a low purr, a sound that filled the small tunnel with warmth. Eli smiled and closed his eyes, drifting to sleep again. When morning came, the sky outside burned orange. He stepped out to check the horizon. That's when he saw them 3 scout ships slicing through the clouds, heading straight toward the canyon. Panic jolted through him. He ran back inside. "They found us," he said, grabbing his pack. Karith stood instantly, her ears sharp, her wounds forgotten. The cubs hissed softly, sensing danger. The ships stopped above the ridge. Hovering like dark hawks, light beams swept across the sand. Scanning the surface, Eli's jammer held for a moment, then sparked and died. A piercing siren filled the air. They had been marked. Karith growled, low and deep. Eli shouted, "Run!" Deeper into the tunnels, but she didn't move. Her fur stood on end, energy building under her skin. The golden stripes along her body began to glow brighter. Eli froze, realizing this wasn't fear. This was power. Karith stepped forward, eyes burning. The ships fired flares that burst in white light. She roared, and the light bent around her. The air rippled, distorting like heat waves. A shock wave burst outward, slamming into the canyon walls. The scout ships jolted, their engines sputtering. One dropped from the sky, crashing into the ridge in a blaze of metal and flame. Eli staggered back, covering his ears from the sound. He had never seen energy like that. Karith collapsed to one knee, the glow fading fast, her breath harsh. He ran to her side. "Hey, stay with me," he said. Grabbing her shoulder, she looked at him, her voice a broken growl. "Go." He shook his head. "Not without you." Outside, the last ship turned, retreating toward the north. Karith's eyes flickered open again, faint but still glowing. She touched her paw to his chest, pressing it gently. "Eli," she whispered. He held her hand. "I'm here." For a long moment, there was only the sound of wind and breathing. Then the cubs crawled between them. Curling close to their mother, Eli exhaled slowly, realizing they had survived again, but barely. He looked at her, realizing what she was capable of. She wasn't just strong. She was something far beyond human understanding. A living weapon, a protector, and perhaps something sacred. He whispered, half in fear, half in awe, "What are you, Karith?" She didn't answer. She only leaned her head closer, her golden eyes dimming as she drifted into exhausted sleep. Eli sat beside her all night, guarding the tunnel entrance. The flames outside painted the canyon in red light. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the real army was already on its way. And Eli knew the next time they came, neither hiding nor running would be enough. The next dawn came painted in blood and smoke. The horizon glowed faint red from distant fires, where the wrecked scout ship still burned. Eli hadn't slept at all, his eyes heavy but his mind racing. Kerith still lay beside the cubs, her breath deep and slow, her body weak from the power she unleashed. The bandage he had tied around her wound was soaked again. He replaced it carefully, his hands trembling. Every time he touched her fur, he felt warmth and electricity under his skin. It was like her body carried energy not meant for this world. Outside, faint rumbles rolled through the air. Not thunder engines, they were coming. Eli climbed the ridge and stared into the rising light. In the distance, ships hovered in formation military. Not raiders this time. Polished hulls, human insignia, and long guns that gleamed in the sun. They weren't here to talk. They were here to erase whatever had destroyed their drones. He hurried back into the tunnel. Kerith was awake now, sitting upright, her eyes calm but fierce. The cubs hid behind her. Trembling, Eli crouched beside her. Speaking fast, "They found us. We have to go deeper. The canyon connects to the old mining shafts. Maybe we can." She placed a paw on his arm, stopping him. Her gaze was steady. She understood, but she wasn't going to run. Eli shook his head. "You can't fight them all," he said. "They'll bomb this whole canyon. They'll kill you." She tilted her head slightly. Her voice came low, rough, but almost human now. "No kill," she said slowly. "Protect." Eli froze. It was the first word she had ever spoken clearly. He whispered, "Protect." "Who?" She looked at the cubs, then at him. And her eyes said the rest. He wanted to argue, to tell her she didn't have to stay, but he knew that would mean nothing. Kerith was what she was, a protector, a mother, and something older than war. Eli stood and began moving quickly, gathering what little they had left: fuel cells, signal packs, explosives. If this was going to end here, he would make sure it counted as the suns climbed higher. The first dropships appeared, metal monsters lowering from the sky. Dozens of soldiers spilled out, their armor reflecting gold and ash. They moved like machines, scanning the rocks, marking targets. Eli could hear the hum of energy rifles charging. He took one last look at the Tigress. She stood at the entrance now, glowing faintly again, the wounds on her body shimmering with light instead of blood. The cubs pressed behind her legs. Silent but wide-eyed, Eli ran beside her. "Weapon in hand," he said quietly. "If this is how it ends, let's end it together." She glanced at him, eyes soft for just a moment. Then she turned toward the rising army. The first shot came from the ridge. The beam struck the canyon wall, sending shards of rock flying. The Tigress didn't flinch. She roared, and the air itself seemed to split. Energy burst from her body like sunlight tearing through the storm. The first line of soldiers was thrown backward, weapons shattering, armor glowing white-hot from heat. Eli ducked behind a rock, the wind from the blast knocking him down. He saw her standing there, surrounded by light. Her stripes blazed like molten gold, her eyes burning like twin stars. But the soldiers kept coming. Drones swooped overhead, firing plasma rounds that scorched the sand. Eli fired back, taking out two, his body shaking from recoil. He shouted through the chaos, "Kerith, fall back." But she didn't move. She leapt forward, cutting through the attackers like lightning. Every roar sent shockwaves through the ground. The canyon walls cracked and echoed her fury. She wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the cubs, for him, for something greater than survival. Then a missile struck the ridge. The blast threw Eli across the ground, slamming him into a wall. He tasted blood, his vision blurred. Through the haze, he saw Kerith stumble, one leg collapsing under her. The soldiers closed in, surrounding her, weapons raised. Without thinking, Eli stood, limping toward them, shouting, "Stop! She's not your enemy." They didn't listen. He fired his rifle again, hitting one of them. The others turned on him instantly. A plasma bolt tore past his shoulder. Searing flesh, he dropped to his knees. Gasping, Tigress saw it, and something inside her broke. Her roar this time wasn't sound, it was light. It flooded the canyon, blinding and pure. The sand lifted. The rocks shook. The soldiers screamed. Their weapons melting in their hands, Eli covered his face, the heat washing over him like a second sun. When he looked up again, the world was still. The army was gone. Only silence and ash remained. Tigress stood in the middle of it, barely breathing, her body glowing faintly like dying embers. Eli crawled toward her, grabbing her paw. "Hey, stay with me," he whispered. His voice cracking, she looked down at him. Her eyes soft, calm. The light around her began to fade. The cubs whimpered, crawling closer. Pressing against her side, Tigress lowered her head, touching her forehead gently against Eli's. "Live," she whispered, her voice faint but clear. And then the light inside her flared one last time. A wave of golden fire swept across the canyon, erasing every scar, sealing every wound. And when it faded, she was gone. Only the cubs and the soft echo of her hum remained. Eli sat there in the silence, tears mixing with dust. The air still shimmered faintly, warm and alive. He looked up at the sky where the ships had fled. The clouds parted slightly, and for a moment, he thought he saw her face in the sunlight. Smiling, he whispered, "You protected us, Tigress. Now I'll protect them." Years passed. The story of Delta 9 became legend. A wasteland once marked by war turned into a sanctuary, and there, under the broken moons, a small settlement grew, humans and alien refugees living side by side. At the center of it all stood a mechanic with gray hair and tired eyes, and beside him, two grown tigress-like beings walked proudly, their golden stripes glowing faintly in the dark. They were her children, her legacy, and above them, carved into stone, were words both human and alien. She protected life, and he protected her memory every night. When the sun set and the winds whispered through the canyons, the people swore they could still hear her roar, not of anger, but of promise, a promise that compassion could bridge any world, that even on the edge of the galaxy, human kindness could still turn monsters into guardians and silence into hope.